Hey guys, it's Kevin again. This is my review for The Americans, Season 3, Episode 7, Walter Taffet. And I know last week I didn't love last week's episode. I thought last week's episode was still really good. I just didn't love it last week. But this, guys, this was by far the best episode of the season, I have to say. And one of the things I think actually worked really well, surprisingly, was Noah Emmerich's direction. Because if you know the guy that plays Stan, Noah Emmerich, he actually directed this episode. And wow, he really... I want to see him direct more episodes of The Americans. He did an amazing job directing this episode, and we have to give applause to him. He did an amazing job directing this episode, and I absolutely love this episode. This is, as I said, by far best episode of the season. Such an intense episode, and shit's gonna go down. I have to say that. So let's just get into this episode because it was amazing. So we start with Philip. He is listening to news on the radio about the war in Afghanistan. He heads back upstairs and goes to Paige's room, and he asks what she's reading. And she says her mom said, of course, last week Elizabeth said this to her, that they did stuff with the civil rights movement, as how often you see black people in Falls Church, and she says DC still has ghettos, and she says her mom took her to one of those neighborhoods, and Paige says that it was amazing seeing these people live like that so close to them, and it really just shows how different these two really are. I mean, just hearing Paige talk about it, it really does show the different directions that Philip and Elizabeth's life is taking. You can see this look on Philip's face, like, why would she say this to her without my consent? And she says that Elizabeth told them about Gregory, which of course was their activist friend who was killed by cops, and she asked what made him stop believing in change. And I like that she asked him that, because she should ask him that. And he says he still believes, but you get older and realize there are a lot of ways to make things change. And I do have to agree with what he's doing, but of course he's still hiding his identity from her and everything, and you can see that definitely is starting to become more of a problem. I mean, the older Paige gets, the smarter she gets. That's really what it comes down to, is the older she gets, the smarter she's going to get, and they need to understand that. And I really love where this is headed, I have to say. So Philip finds Elizabeth working on code in the bedroom, and he asks what it is. She says the center. So I thought that was a really great way to start the episode. And basically, Philip then finds Elizabeth working on code in their bedroom, and he asks what it is. And she says that the center asks for weekly updates on Paige, and Philip paces and then goes through a drawer slamming things. And she asks what he's looking for, and he says aspirin. He says Paige told him about, and I thought this scene was just amazing. And one of the things I love about the Americans this season is just, they can have the simplest scene with just talking, and it can be so intense. And he says Paige told him about their little field trip. Elizabeth says good, and she told him she was moving forward with Paige, which she did tell him that. She did tell him that and everything, and he tells her not to lie to him, and she says she never lied. He asks if this is how this is going to work, because, he's very worried that this is how it's going to work with them now. And he asks if he'll come home one day, and Paige will just say she knows who they are. It's really getting down to the point where he's worried that that is what's going to happen here. That Paige is just going to blurt out, hey, I know who you are, and I know everything. And he's very worried by what Elizabeth is going to do here. And I have to say, I do agree with him on this, that Elizabeth can't just tell Paige things. She needs to do things. She can't just do these abrupt things. I understand she's trying to prepare Paige and trying to guide her and get her on a good path, but Philip has just as good as a relationship with Paige. She really does. And it's not like he's bad with Paige or anything. He's great with Paige. I mean, we saw those episodes. He's great with Paige. It's just becoming a very big problem for them to deal with this. And you can just see how harder it is for them. And, basically, I thought that was a very interesting scene, and I definitely really enjoyed that. So Elizabeth says she honestly doesn't know what would happen if, Paige said that. And Philip's in the shower stewing. Elizabeth comes in the bathroom and closes the door. And she says a guy named Ruben is coming from Moscow sent by Gabriel. And she says he's bait and number 3 on South Africa's most wanted list. Now, she says she trusts Gabriel on this. He's still annoyed. And, he's still annoyed about this. He doesn't care what she says at this point. He's really annoyed by her and really does not want to talk to her. You can just tell. He's not even talking to her. He's, basically playing the silent treatment. So Stan and Adderholt go through files, and he asks about Nina, and Stan says she did what was expected, and they talk about running resources, and Adderholt and tells Stan that he had someone he was running that thought they were running him, and I thought that was very interesting, because of course, they're trying to find Nina. That's their big mission here, is to find Nina and everything, but of course, they're still investigating about, Zanadia. They're still investigating about her. So Elizabeth is with Hans outside the college, and she again, you can see this chemistry between Elizabeth and Hans. I know it's fake, but you just see this chemistry between them. And she tells him not to get overeager. She says they likely recruited Todd back in South Africa. He says Todd wasn't naive and says he grew up with kids like him who were just miniature copies of their parents. And she says she saw Todd meeting with Eugene Venture and points out Ruben, and she says she thinks he'll go after Ruben and then they can capture him. And he asks how she knows this, and she says that they don't, they don't, that you should bet on long odds. And he asks what he can do, and she says he'll do surveillance from a corner and honk if he sees something. So basically, that's what's going on there. So Philip comes home with pizza, but Paige says she already ate. He calls Henry over, and she says he's at Doug's working on a science project, and he invites Stan over. So basically, his whole plan, you can see, is just, it's not working. Paige is spending so much time with Elizabeth that she really doesn't have much time for Philip, and it really is becoming frustrating for him. You can see why they don't get along, really, and it makes sense why they don't get along. It's not like, oh, they're just not getting along. No, it makes sense why. It's because Elizabeth is spending so much time with Paige, and Philip's not having any time with her now, and he's very upset at that, because I think he wants to have equal time with her. They need to figure out how to do that, but it doesn't seem like they can. So Stan comes over, and again, I love the pairing between Philip and Stan. I just love it. And, basically, he invites Stan over. He says he invited Sandra to the memorial with him, and she probably thought he was an asshole. Because, of course, she said no to going to that funeral with him. And that's, again, I do agree with him, that she probably thought he came across as being like an asshole. And, episode 4, he completely told her how much he loved her and everything. And then he tells, she talked about how she didn't really want to be with him or didn't want him in her life right now. So I can understand why she thought he was being an asshole, because she clearly told him, I don't want you in my life right now. Okay, as much as I loved you, I don't want you in my life, and Stan really does need to respect that. So Philip asks why, and Stan says he's always trying to get noticed, and he asks Philip what's going on with him, and he says Elizabeth is busy and the kids are busy, which is true. Everyone's just too busy, and he says he feels like he and Elizabeth are on opposite sides all the time, and Stan tells him to hang in and says it's better than where he is now. And I think that's actually very good advice, what he says, that, it's better to be where he is now than to be divorced with, because where Stan's divorced, he barely sees his kids. He doesn't really get to do much besides being an FBI agent trying to find Nina, who he is truly in love with. And he really is a crazier life than Philip. But he doesn't realize that Philip definitely is a crazier life than him. But it definitely is better for Elizabeth and Philip's marriage. But in the same way, it's just as tragic because they're not really talking to each other. Mentally, I personally think they are divorced. I really do. Them not talking to each other, I think they pretty much are just separated right now. I really do. Even though they're not physically separated, I think their mindset is just separated. They have completely different mindsets, and they both don't. They're not even thinking about the same things. So Elizabeth walks with Ruben, and he says it's been 18 months since he was home, and she promises to get him back safe, and he asks about her family. And she says she has one of each. She says her kids think she runs a small family business, and he says he has 4 boys that know not to ask what he does. So I thought this was interesting because this guy is also a KGB agent, and he has a family as well, and you can see the differences between the two of them. Because, basically we see that his kids don't question him, but of course we are to assume that Paige is much smarter than those 4 boys. The reason that Paige is so curious is because she's smart. I've said this before. She's not an idiot. She's not someone who's gonna believe everything she hears. She's a teenager, and the older we get, the smarter we get. It's really that simple. And the older Paige gets, the more questionable her parents' behaviors are going to be to her. We saw a scene in last week's promo where she's yelling at them and everything. I'm very much looking forward to that, and I think that definitely is coming up soon. So Stan calls to confirm Zanatia's appointment, and he goes into Frank's office to get a signature, and because he sees Adderholt in there and wants to know what's what. And Frank goes in to sign the form, takes the cap off his pen, and it rattles when it hits the desk, and Adderholt is suspicious. He takes it apart, and they spot the bug, because, of course, they're trying to figure out who planted this bug. And Frank looks at each of them, and they cut their eyes away. Adderholt closes the blinds so Martha and the others can't see in, and Frank tells them to go back to their desk, and he'll let them know. Now, this next scene, one of the things I loved about Noah Emmerich directing this episode is that he had all this tension, but no action going on. This is a scene where there's so much tension, but there's no action. And we see Martha. Martha looks very worried here, and she takes her purse, goes to the restroom, she locks herself in, sits on a toilet, pulls out the receiver out of her purse, pulls it apart, yanks the board out, someone comes into the bathroom and goes into a stall. She sits silent, she looks and sees ladies' feet below the stall, and she sits quiet, and the other woman does her business and leaves. She sighs, goes back to taking it apart while crying, she washes the pieces, then wraps them in paper towels, she shoves them down into her purse, and she goes back to her desk, and a guy is running a signal detector all around the desk. She tries to work but looks stressed. And he comes over near her desk, runs it across her desk, then by her purse. She sits still and tries to look bored. He passes it over her purse and then pauses there, but then moves on. She sides back up to her desk and goes back to work, and Frank introduces her to Walter Taffet, who I was wondering how he was going to play into this episode, and we find out who he is. He asks her to come with him, and he asks Jean to step out of the computer room so they can have it, and Walter asks when the computer specialist started, and he asks her for the logs of Frank's visitors, and she asks how far, and he says 3 months, and Taffet says he'll start tomorrow and tells Frank it could be a janitor that got fired, an agent, or could even be Frank. So they don't know who was fired, but it could be really anyone. So they don't really know what's going to happen here. So, again, one of the things about that scene, there's no action in that scene. That's not a scene with action. It's mostly silent. It's mostly Martha just planting this bug, but you can see the look in her face. She knows that this could end up terribly for her, and I've said this before, I think Martha's going to die this season. I don't think she's going to make it out of the season. I really don't. I mean, just that scene alone makes me think, okay, she's in danger. She is. You can see that she's in danger, and I think that really is what that scene is trying to show. So, Phillip and Elizabeth are in the car, ready to do an op, and he asks if she's ready, and they go to have dinner with Lisa, Elizabeth's Northrop buddy, and he's playing Jack, her as she called it, sugar daddy, and Lisa asks about him, and he asks what she wants to know. She asks where he's from and what he does, and he says she probably really wants to know if she's good enough for Elizabeth. He says he's worked at the same job for 15 years. Again, I really do love the bonding between Elizabeth and Lisa, much like I like the bonding between Phillip and, damn it, what's her name now? I can't think of her name. What's her name? You know, the 15-year-old girl. I can't think of her name now, but just like their bonding's Ron as well, you feel really bad for these people because they really do bond very well with them, and they are good at just being actors. They really are. If you think about it, they really are playing a part in this. I mean, they're basically just acting, and they're doing a great job at doing it because it just feels so real, and I think to them, some of the friendships are real. We never really get to see their point of view just because of how the show is. We never really get to see how they personally feel about these missions. So, I mean, we do know some of them, how they feel, sort of, because, I mean, Phillip talked to Elizabeth, in the, last week's episode about it, should he have sex with, I can't remember her name, but the 15-year-old girl, so I thought that was really good. So he says he's worked at the same job for 15 years, was divorced once but no kids, and he says meeting Michelle, aka Elizabeth, is one of the greatest things that's happened to him. Because, again, to Lisa, her name is Michelle. They're all giggly like a happy, newly dating couple, and it just shows where they're not. They're not like that. They're not happy anymore. And again, you just feel bad for them because they used to be like this. Go back to season 1, they were happily playful like this, and they're not like this now. Their marriage is dark, their marriage is sad, their marriage is full of anger. It's not happy giggly, and I think that's really what that scene was trying to show, and I definitely really enjoyed that. So Martha gets home, turns on the light, she opens the dresser, puts the crush received in there, and when she's hiding it, she sees the gun there, but puts it back. She's upset and tearful, opens the next drawer, looks through Clark's clothes, and she finds a copy of the Karma Sutra and starts to cry. So, Elizabeth and Phil make it back home, and he says he needs to go to Martha's tonight. She says she'll see him tomorrow, but neither gets out of the car. He says maybe Venter won't show up, and she says if he does, she wishes she had a few moments with Hans. And he says it can keep him out of the way. She says Ruben was talking about his sons and wanting them to become fighters like him. And Phillip asks if she thinks that's a good thing. And she says she felt for him and his kids having to fight this brutal, awful war. And again, this shows how they feel about the people they're dealing with. I definitely really enjoy that. And she talks about how she's very happy they did this, that it's admirable and brave, but Phillip says they don't have a lot of choices there, which they really don't. I mean, when you're a soldier, you have to save people. For example, the movie American Sniper, a lot of people are very controversial about that. The reason why he had to kill all those people is because that was his job, that was his duty. You have no other choice but to do your job or you're going to get fired. So there really is no other choice there, and it's really that simple. So he says he needs to go and cranks the car. She gets out, opens the garage door, and Stan sits at the kitchen counter in his place. He hears the car door, and it's Matthew. And Sandra drops him off and asks if Stan is okay. And I really like this scene as well. She says she talked to Arthur, but says she's not his wife anymore, so they decided she shouldn't go. And he says technically she still is. And Sandra said, because I mean, they still haven't gotten an official divorce yet, even though they are separated. They didn't get a divorce. Technically, she is still his wife, and Sandra says she does understand this and then says she thinks it's time they did something about that. And I basically now it's a very sad scene, but they are officially going to get divorced, and it, it, it doesn't get better for Stan. I mean, his life is going down the shitter. It really is. His life is not getting any better. Every episode, it gets worse and worse for Stan, and you just feel so bad for him. And I've said this before. Stan, honestly, is probably the most vulnerable character on the show right now. I mean, he's getting his heart broken so much, and you got to feel so bad for the guy. I feel so bad for him, and you have to. I mean, it's so sad what's happening to him, but yeah. So I felt so bad for Stan in that scene. So then Martha sits with a book on her lap when Clark comes home, and he asks how she is and goes to kiss her, and he asks if something is wrong. She says she's tired and it was a long day, then walks away from him. Now, this scene also shows that their relationship as well is sort of starting to deteriorate, and he tries to figure out. He says he has an early flight in the morning, but is glad they can have the night, and he asks where her purse is, and she says she left it at work, and he asks where it is. She says it's in her desk drawer, but she says she forgot him when shopping at lunchtime and just forgot it. And she says she had to get the spare key from the neighbor. She asks how his day was. He says it was boring, uneventful, and fine. And she says she's never seen his apartment. This I thought was really interesting because, I mean, I've said this before. Martha's not an idiot, but I think the reason she just has believed Philip all this time is simply just because she's in love with the guy. I mean, she's in love with him. She married him. She thinks that she should be with him, and she has believed him because it seemed believable. But now, after 3 years, definitely she's starting to question it, and she says she's never seen his apartment. He says they can pick a night, order takeout, and try a new position on his futon. And she says, how about they go tonight and get his coat? And Stan watches Reagan on the news when Matthew comes complaining about there being so much food, no food, and he says there is bologna, frozen pizza, and soup, and he opens the can for him and heats it up, and Matthew asks if he's going to be at the funeral in Chicago, and he says it's a memorial, and a lot of agents will be there. He says he and David worked undercover together, and it seems like Matthew still wants to be close with Stan. To me, it seems like Matthew, even though Sandra really doesn't want anything to do with Stan, Matthew to me seems like he does want something to do with him. He wants to be part of his life in somehow, and he wants to make sure that happens, because I think he really does feel bad for Stan. Matthew says he thought they were just friends, and Stan says David was the only person he could talk to for a long time, and his son asks how it was. Stan says it was strange and hard. He says he got pretty screwed up, and Matthew asks how. Stan says he had to pretend to be friends with terrible people that he didn't like, and he says that a man named John Reisling is in prison now. He was a bad guy, and Matthew asks what he did, and his dad said he killed people and other bad things, and Matthew asks if he made him kill people, and his dad says no, thank God, and he asks if he was scared. So I thought that was a very good scene. It's just showing the bonding between them, also just showing Stan's personal reactions. This is what I definitely like seeing. So Clark takes Martha to his apartment. He says he knows he has to take a menu somewhere. He says he was saving the bottle for their anniversary, but says they could have it tonight. She looks around and asks if they can live there together like a normal and I like that she asked him this. She asked if they can just live there together like a normal married couple, and he says normal is for other people, and he says he thinks things will get better. And he tells her that normal's not good. Normal's boring. And I can see his point, but at the same time, he really can't do this anymore. This whole disguise thing is backfiring for him. Because Martha's getting smarter. She's not an idiot. She's realizing, you know what, he's never home. Why is he never home? Because he is working. And what is he working on? She doesn't really know. He's just been very broad with her, and I think she's really just starting to put all the pieces together. It really does make sense, and I think she's gonna, honestly, I think Martha is gonna find out before he even tells her. I really feel that's what's gonna happen there. We did see, though, a promo for next week's episode where Clark says to her, what I'm about to tell you is extremely true, and she has this disappointed look on her face. I don't know if it's about that, but we'll see. I don't know if he's going to reveal all to her, because I just don't know if he'd be that, trusting of her, because I really don't even know if he trusts her. I think he is, again, he only was essentially the only reason he's doing this is to get information out of her. That's why he's doing this. He really doesn't want anything to do with her, but I do think that he sort of trusts her. I don't know. I could kind of see Martha becoming like Annalise or Yosef, how Yosef and Annalise are. I could see that happening to Martha, but I don't know. Martha's working for Stan, and I mean, he can't do anything about that, so I really don't know. So she then sees a photo of Elizabeth there, and Martha says she's not in the mood for wine and tells him to save it, and to her, she thinks that he's cheating on her, and Clark asks if everything's okay. He pulls her to him, hugs her, he kisses her once, then again. Martha stops him and says sorry, he asks what's wrong, and they can talk about it. She says that she may be coming down with something and just wants to go to bed, and she says she wants to go home, and he asks if she's sure. He says he'll drive her, and again, you can see that their relationship, too, is starting to deteriorate. Every single good thing in Phillip's life is just starting to deteriorate. Just from that one conversation with Stan, everything's going down the shitter. It really is. So he goes to his other home, his real home, and finds Elizabeth asleep. He climbs into bed, lies down beside her, touches her hair, she stirs, she reaches over, pulls his arm around her. She asks what time it is, and he says it's late. She wakes more and says she should have told him about her talk with Paige, and I like that she said that because, yeah, she should have. And Phillip tells her he has another son by Irina when they were just kids, and I like that he said this because I didn't want this plot to get stupid, and I like that he tells her this. He says the kid is 20 and is in Afghanistan. He says Gabriel told him, and Elizabeth turns over and asks if he's in combat, and Phillip says he's a paratrooper, and I'm wondering if they're somehow going to recruit this kid. I could see that possibly happening. I could see them working with him, and also for a way to Phillip to, I think, connect with him, because I definitely think he wants to connect with you know, his son and everything, because this is his son, and he really doesn't know him very well, so I think this would be a good way for Phillip to connect with him, and I definitely can see him coming on to the show. I don't know if he's going to come in, when and if he comes on to the show, but if he does ever, I definitely want to see Phillip try to bond with him. I think that's something that I definitely want to see, and I think it could be very well done if they decide to do that. So, next morning, Elizabeth fixes lunches and gets the kids ready for school. Henry forgets a book and she tosses it to Phillip, who gives it to him. The kids leave and Phillip tells her something is up with Martha, and she asks what he's going to do. He says he's not up for another kid, and she keeps pushing the foster thing, which she does, and you know, he needs to tell her that he doesn't want kids, and he's told her that many times, but I just don't think she's going to take no for an answer anymore. So Walter gets onto the elevator next to Martha, who immediately looks stressed, and Hans lurks outside the cafe, sees Reuben with Todd, and you can see Martha's look on her face. She's just really upset with what's going on. So Elizabeth watches from a van, and this is the last scene that, again, just like Martha's scene, there's barely any dialogue in this scene, but it's so intense and so crazy you don't even know what's going to happen next, and I love that. So Phil lurks in the cave, she sees a van pull up, and Philip looks over at Reuben, and then he sees the same car drive by a second time. He sees a guy, Venter, get out, chirps his radio twice, and Elizabeth cranks her van, and Philip gets up, walks outside, tries to take Venter, and they struggle, and Elizabeth shoots the woman in the other van, then hears the horn honking, and Hans alerts her. She heads to help Philip and hits Venter. Philip throws him into the van, they take off, and Reuben and Todd rush out of the diner. Hans watches the van drive by and looks stunned, probably just because of how controlling she is and how powerful she is. He had no idea it's going to happen, and I don't really know what's going to happen next, but that's pretty crazy what's going to happen with Reuben and Todd, definitely. I mean, just to see, I mean, it seemed like they were going to bond with them, but now, no, they're turning against them. I think that's definitely very interesting, and I'm very interested in seeing what is going to end up happening there. So, we'll see what happens, and I think that's just all very interesting. So, basically, this was by far the best episode of the season. As I said, I mean, so much good stuff in this episode. You have Martha starting to figure out that Clark is, you know, not exactly who he says he is. I think to her, he just thinks that he's having an, you know, she just thinks that he's having an affair. I think that's what she thinks, but what she doesn't realize is that there's a lot more to it. I think that definitely is what she's going to think, but it's not that at all. Stan, I feel so bad for Stan. I mean, he really wants to get back together with Sandra, but she wants nothing to do with him. I think him and Matthew are definitely going to connect, though. You can see that Matthew really does want to connect with him, and I think that they are going to connect, because I want to see those two connect. I like the bond they have, and I want it to work between them. I do. I want to see Stan happy somehow. Elizabeth and Philip, it seems like they're okay now, but it just seems like they're not really married right now. They just act like they're just in a relationship because they're in an arranged relationship and they have to be together. That's what it seems like now. It seems very season one, and I definitely like that because it definitely shows the soft reboot, tendency that this season has so far, and I definitely really like that. Now, as far as the whole thing with Philip's son goes, I don't know if they're gonna try to get Philip's son, but I kind of feel like that's what they're setting up here. Is that Philip's son is gonna be recruited by them, and they're gonna try to get him on their side. I don't know what's gonna happen, but we'll see what ends up happening there. So I don't know what's gonna happen. And I don't, that was a pretty crazy scene, I have to say. Also, the montage, oh my god, I've said this before, The Americans is like the best montages on TV. So, the montage in this episode was just amazing, loved it. I always love the 80s music they play in the montage scenes. They're always so intense, and just, as I said, Noah Emmerich needs to direct more episodes. He did a fantastic job directing this episode. He really directed this episode perfectly. It was a fantastically directed episode. Absolutely loved everything about this episode. As I said, by far best episode of the season. Is there really anything else I want to talk about? I'm trying to think. Kimmy, that was the girl's name. Is Kimmy gonna come back in the plot? Seems like Kimmy is absent now because, of course, Philip, as Jim said, he wanted nothing to do with her. So I kind of like that as well. Is Martha gonna find out about Philip's identity before he even tells her? Again, we saw in the promo that he tells her something, but I just kind of feel like she's gonna find out by just thinking about it. It's pretty simple. I mean, if you really do think about it, I mean, I wouldn't come up with that. I pretty much think she's gonna think he's having an affair. She definitely knows something's up. She's not stupid. She's not an idiot. She knows there's something else going on. And then Paige, I definitely think that by the end of the season, Paige is gonna know who they are. Okay, she's gonna know. And I kind of have a prediction here what's gonna happen if Paige finds out. I've said this before. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but I kind of feel like since Paige is in church and since she has very different beliefs in them, I feel like Paige would get her church group against Phillip and Elizabeth and all KGB agents and try to take them down and start like hunting KGB agents, kind of like what Stan does, except a little bit different because they protest about it. And I don't know if that get her killed or whatever, but I think that could be very interesting. And I definitely feel that is the direction we're headed this season. The season is so dark, but it's so amazing as well. I love everything about it. And let me know what you guys saw this episode. Absolutely loved it. I'll see you guys in my next video, which will be my review for tonight's episode of The Vampire Diaries, which I just realized comes back tonight. I didn't realize that. I went on Facebook and I saw that like an hour ago that it's coming back, and I'm like, oh yeah, Vampire Diaries comes back tonight. Yeah, so I'll see you guys in my next video. Let me know if you guys saw this episode. Very interested in hearing your thoughts on it, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Okay, bye.